Alrighty, so today we're going to talk about the Vancouver Whitecaps in the Moving Forward series episode. And after last year of them making the playoffs, there's no doubt that this season there was hope that they were going to make consecutive playoff appearances for the first time of what seems like forever, but it did not happen. And just like Charlotte, they didn't make it to the playoffs, but it wasn't because of lack of trying, because they really fought to the very end. And in the case, unlike Charlotte, they actually fought all the way to decision. They had a chance to sneak into the playoffs, and Vanni Sartini almost had a chance to do his specialty like what he did last year of guiding this team into the playoffs with a great run in the second half of the season. But unfortunately, this time they fall short. They have a 12-7-15 record and finished with 43 points. They scored 40 goals this season, which, yeah, was definitely one of the issues for this team. This team at times had problem in terms of scoring goals. And keeping the ball out of the net was also an issue. 57 goals conceded. Definitely one of the worst defensive team in the Western Conference and in the league in general. And their goal differential is minus 17. But despite that, they finished ninth in the Western Conference. And in terms of the top goal scorer of this team, believe it or not, Lucas Cavallini actually finished as the top goal scorer. And I couldn't believe that at first because, this has been a very turbulent season for Lucas Cavallini, and that again, it's pretty clear that he definitely did not live up to the DP amount that Vancouver paid him a couple of years ago, and it's just getting to a point where they just flat out decided to not re-sign him. But despite that, he finished with 9 goals, followed by Ryan Gaul with 8 goals, Tosan Ricketts with 4 goals, Brian White with 4 goals, and Christian Dahome with 2 goals. Top assist leader, I would say Ryan Gaul finished with 9 assists. That's not a big surprise because that's their main playmaker. Then you got Dahome with 4 assists, Luis Martins with 3 assists, Ryan Raposo with 3 assists, and David Caicedo with 2 assists. So, what are some of the highlights for the Vancouver Whitecaps? They won silverwares. I mean, I know it's just the Canadian Championship, and that, the Canadian Championship, for many people, they might just kind of put an asterisk in terms of calling it a silverware, but still, at the end of the day, it is a silverware, and especially it's kind of important for the Vancouver Whitecaps too, because as much as we know the Canadian Championship has been pretty much dominated by 2 teams, that is Montreal and Toronto FC, Vancouver has not won the title for very often. In fact, coming into this season prior of them winning the Canadian Championship, they've only won it once in 2015. So this definitely was a big deal for the Whitecaps, and especially I think it's a big deal with the way that they want to amend what happened last year in the Canadian Championship and also the year before, where I think the year before they lost to Calgary in the Canadian Championship, and then last year they lost to Pacific FC, and that was the game that basically cost Mark Dos Santos' job. So there's no doubt that they want to make amends some very disappointing Canadian Championship elimination, and they did exactly that, winning it and now able to progress into CCL for the first time since 2015. And again, they fought very hard to the end for the playoffs, just like Charlotte FC. Many people written this team off thinking that, well, yeah, they have no chance of making the playoffs with how far they were back. Though I will say, unlike Charlotte, where Charlotte, I think many people has kind of rights to write them off because they had a tough schedule. I will say that there are some maybe very optimistic Whitecaps fans will say that, well, we know the Vanni Sartini magic is not gone with this team, and it definitely shown down the stretch when they really become like that Vanni Sartini kind of team from last season down the stretch. Tough to play against, especially at home, and they pull off a couple of big wins at home to really get themselves to a situation where on decision day, like I said, that was a day where all they need to do is win against Minnesota, and they would have made it to the playoffs. And then again, BC Place, it remains mostly a fortress. They have won 10 games this season at BC Place, only lost 4 times this year, and that when you have a good home record like the Whitecaps has had this season, yeah, you're gonna at least have a shot in terms of making the playoffs. And unlike how I said about Colorado and how even though the Rapids had a good home record, they really struggle on the road to a point where they only have 1 win. At least the Whitecaps have got a couple of road wins. I believe they got like 2 or 3 road wins this season, and that's not a lot, but in this day and age, if you can able to get that amount plus a very good home record, you still have a chance in terms of sneaking into the playoffs, and the Whitecaps came oh so close to do so. So what are some of the lowlights for the Whitecaps? Well, the first big lowlights to highlight is a disastrous start. I mean, it is pretty clear that, we thought last season when this team were made the playoffs, and even though they had a disappointing end, maybe they can carry that into next season. And I think this is just a reminder that, yeah, just because you had a good run in the latter part of the season and you make it to playoffs, it's not always the case where teams can carry that into next season, and it definitely was not the case for the Whitecaps. I mean, this team was an absolute mess in the beginning of the season. They can't score, they can't defend. They just had no idea how to play, and that there's even maybe some small amount might have said that Vanni Sartini job might be in jeopardy because of how bad the team is, and maybe even some Vanni out kind of whisper that was happening in the Whitecaps fan base. But yeah, it was a disastrous start coming out of the gate, and that despite the fact that it was a disastrous start, it's hard to believe that they were actually not the last team to, of course, get a victory or get a first win of the season. The Quakes, of course, had even a more disastrous start, but that's, of course, mainly because of the what saga that happened with the Quakes. But yeah, for the Whitecaps, it was a disastrous start, and really kind of put them behind the 8 ball in the beginning of the season, and kind of had to play catch up. And again, the deep defense and attack was completely AWOL during that stretch. Like, when you cannot not score, and plus you're not going to defense, that is a recipe for disaster. This team was leaking goals left and right, and then going for on the attack, despite the fact that there was definitely some promising in terms of this core with good attacking threat like Ryan Gaul, Brian White, and I'll talk about how that partnership has started to become very steady, especially last season. Yeah, it was nowhere to be found in the first part of the season, and then, of course, the last thing I think is the lowlights for this team, and this is probably the thing that will hurt the most for Whitecaps fans, is that the young players and the main core that they did not live up to the expectation and did not perform. Again, for most of these players in this core, with the likes of Ryan Gaul and Brian White and so forth, it really was kind of a down year, despite the fact that they did finish near the top part. Well, in the case of Brian White, it was definitely a very disappointing season after he had an incredible season coming from the Whitecaps last off season. And then on the defensive area, it was definitely not as strong as last season. And although I will say that the one thing that the Whitecaps at least tried to do in the defensive department is the fact that once they got Andres Kubas, there was no doubt that there was some stability in that and that there's no doubt Kubas is going to be a big part in terms of this main core that they had. But also, as I mentioned with the young players, again, a lot of these young players kind of stall out. Guys like Christian Dahome, Caicedo, they kind of stall out. Though in the case of Caicedo, he actually got injured. So yeah, he definitely he probably could have done much more in this season had he not gone down with an injury. Ryan Repulso kind of had an up and down season. And then one name that I know he's now a Quakes player, but a guy that just kind of never works out for the Whitecaps is Michael Bodismo. I mean, the guy that showed some promise in a couple years ago, part of this deep rebuild, just nowhere to be found. And even some of their depth players like Tosa and Rick is just nowhere to be found for most part of this season in terms of performance. And yeah, despite the fact that they have a lot of good young players and shape up my main core, it's got to be very frustrating for these Whitecaps fans, seeing that it just basically stall out throughout. Now, in terms of MVP and revelation, I'm actually going to kind of cheat a little bit and pick both players. I'm actually going to pick Andres Kubas and Ryan Gaul. And despite the fact that I said Ryan Gaul kind of had a down season, he did kind of start to be much better in the second half of the season. It kind of looked like the Ryan Gaul that we know from last year. But, I mean, this is pretty much no discussion that Andres Kubas is going to be in that. In fact, I probably should have put Kubas instead of Ryan Gaul, because Ryan Gaul didn't really come good until the latter part of the season. But in case of Andres Kubas, when he came into the team, like, we knew that he was going to be a great number 6 for this team, and in some way the way that the Whitecaps basically put him is very similar to how Diego Chara fits for the Portland Timbers. And I think As the season goes along, I think the reason why he kind of started to decrease in his ability is I felt they kind of overplayed him a little bit too much, and that they also put him in spot that he wasn't kind of comfortable for it. But when he is 100% fit and he's able to put in the right spot, he is an absolute immense, and he absolutely does a good job in terms of shutting down plays and protect a relatively weak back line that this Whitecaps team has had. Disappointment. I mean, there was definitely some big disappointment for this team, but none other than Lucas Cavallini. I mean, what a disastrous year that this guy has had, and especially these last couple of season. I feel like, ever since that first good season that Cavallini has with the Whitecaps, it has gone downhill, and to a point where they decided to just kind of get rid of him. I mean, I will say that Cavallini did start to kind of come good as the Whitecaps were starting to make a playoff push, but again, for majority of years, just like Ryan Gaul, didn't really do so well for most of the year, and there was even rumors the fact that he was going to be sold off. It was kind of a miracle the fact that they were able to keep him for that long of a period. But yeah, for Cavallini, huge disappointment this season, and just in general, a huge disappointing signing too. And another example of the Whitecaps still not able to get the hidden gems and hit it at least onto the outfield with some of their DP signings that they have recently tried to get. Now, moving forward for the Vancouver Whitecaps, and as much as I hate to say this, they might need to get a new goalkeeper. And the reason why it pains me to say this is because I'm a Thomas Hasal believer. I really believe that Thomas Hasal can do some good things in MLS and could be a future Canadian national team goalkeeper. But this year, oh boy, this year was a huge disappointment, and just regressed badly with the way that, when he came into the scene. I mean, I just kind of had a feeling that maybe he was thrust into the first team and be the number one of this Whitecaps team a little bit too soon. But at the same time, I don't think they had a choice, because once Maxime Crépeau left, it was pretty much now time for Thomas Hasal to kind of sink or swim, and there was no doubt that he kind of sank before he, of course, got injured. Now, eventually, he did come back after the injury, but man, he just looked like a shell of his old self once he came back from his injury. And again, there's that question of maybe they kind of rushed him a little bit too soon, but yeah, that injury really just kind of put a dent into his quality, and that he really started to kind of look like a guy that looks nothing like the guy that was considered to be a savior for this Whitecaps team during the MLS's back tournament. And there's no doubt that I still have a feeling that he can come good, but it's getting to a point where, for this Whitecaps team, they're in a situation where when you have the core that they build up, they can't afford to just have a shaky goalkeeper at the back, and that is definitely going to be one area that they might, of course, need to look in. And before you can say, well, what about Cody Cropper? Yes, Cody Cropper, he was okay for most of the season, but the problem with Cody Cropper is the fact that he's a backup goalkeeper, and he's shown why when he played for this Whitecaps team, why he's a backup goalkeeper. Because at times, yes, he has made some big saves to keep this Whitecaps team in games, but then there's times where he makes some boneheaded decision and costs this team points. And again, just going forward for this team that want to be competitive, you cannot have a goalkeeper that is very shaky at the back that this Whitecaps team seems to be dealing with throughout the season. And then the second thing moving forward is that they're gonna have to hope this main core and the young players can bounce back and reach their potential. I mean, again, this is a situation for the Whitecaps where, as much as they can definitely add some players, and I've mentioned before in the News of the Week episode, they have added some pieces to improve their team. It's getting to a point where this is really kind of the main core that they shape off of, and that, they better hope that the main core that they've been shaped up with for the past couple of years is going to come good, because if they decided to tear it down, if it doesn't work out again, oh boy, the Whitecaps fans are going to be turning on them. And, the Whitecaps fans I think some have already kind of turned on them with this long rebuild and stuff like that. But, for those that were patient enough to wait until to see this team finally come to good, this will destroy all hopes that those fans can have, and that they just got to hope that this main core would work out and can get to a way where they can be a playoff contender and continue to go from there. And then the last thing that I think the Whitecaps moving forward is going to have to deal with is congested schedule. So we talked about before, whenever MLS team are in CCL, it's kind of just a kiss of death in terms of the way that, yes, on one hand, it's great that you get to play against the Emekis team, but then on the other hand, if you play long enough in that tournament, then yeah, you are going to absolutely cripple your roster. And not to mention with the way that this season, I think they also have the League Cup that is going on. That's going to add more games for the Whitecaps, and it's going to put more strain to teams that is in CCL. And this is also where I go back to say those young players, they better bounce back for this team, because I think at some point they need to rely on some of these young players, whether it's doing a midweek games or doing games that they desperately need some squad rotation. They need to rely on those guys, and if those guys are not able to develop in a way where they can take the challenge, then this team again is going to be like similar to some of these good teams that we've seen in the league, where on paper you look at this team and they definitely have some talent in their roster, but then when you look deeper, you see a bit of a hollow shell of a team that just have no depth whatsoever. And once the team is run to the ground because of the fact that the team cannot squad rotate without losing tons of quality in their teams, that's when things start to go downhill. So for the Whitecaps, that's why they're hoping that their depth is going to come good, and a lot of those depth pieces are those young players that either come out of the Whitecaps Academy, or the fact that they of course signed those U22 initiative for the past couple of years, doing this deep rebuild that they went through. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this video? And if you're a Whitecaps fan, what do you think was the highlights, the lowlights, the MVP revelation, disappointment, and most importantly, moving forward, how is this team going to look heading into next season? But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.